This hearing is called the Capitol Insurrection. Let's be honest with the American people. It was not an insurrection, and we cannot call it that and be truthful. The Cambridge English Dictionary defines an insurrection as, and I quote, an organized attempt by a group of people to defeat their government and take control of their country, usually by violence. And then from the Century Dictionary, the act of rising against civil authority or governmental restraint, specifically the armed resistance of a number of persons to the power of the state. As one of the members who stayed in the Capitol and on the House floor, who, with other Republican colleagues, helped barricade the door until almost 3 p.m. that day from the mob who tried to enter, I can tell you the House floor was never breached and it was not an insurrection. This is the truth. There was an undisciplined mob. There were some rioters and some who committed acts of vandalism. But let me be clear, there was no insurrection, and to call it an insurrection, in my opinion, is a bold-faced lie. Watching the TV footage of those who entered the Capitol and walked through Statuary Hall showed people in an orderly fashion staying between the stanchions and ropes, taking videos and pictures. You know, if you didn't know the TV footage was a video from January the 6th, you would actually think it was a normal tourist visit. There were no firearms confiscated from anyone who breached the Capitol. Also, the only shot fired on January the 6th was from a Capitol police officer who killed an unarmed protester, Ashley Babbitt, in what will probably eventually be determined to be a needless display of lethal force. We heard earlier that her death certificate ruled her death to be a homicide. So based on the definition that I just outlined from 2 dictionaries, this question for former acting Attorney General Jeff Rosen: would you call the events of January 6th an insurrection or a riot with vandalism similar to what we saw last summer? Sir?
I think whatever you call them, they were a huge disappointment. And I think all of us wish they had not occurred. With regards to the specifics of some of the labels that we use, I need to be careful because they could have legal significance. And I've been asked, and I think it's my responsibility as well, not to do anything that might interfere with or in any way jeopardize the cases that are pending. So I want to stay away from the terminology, but I think the events of January 6th, we all have to agree, are things that should never have happened.
Oh, absolutely. I agree with that 100%. You know, but the only insurrection that I have witnessed in my lifetime was the one conducted by members of the FBI with participants from the DOJ and other agencies under the banner Russia, Russia, Russia. High-ranking employees from these federal agencies and members of an independent council coordinated and fed a false narrative for over 2 years that the 2016 election was stolen and illegitimate. Democrats were on the news almost every night saying the evidence is there, and the mainstream media amplified the fake news. This was indeed a very coordinated and well-funded effort by a determined group of people to overthrow our duly elected president, Donald J. Trump. Now, I have a question for the good Chief Conti. Specifically, sir, can you briefly describe your rules of engagement for protests? And at what point are your officers allowed to use lethal force? And then as a follow-up, does that change if the situation is declared to be a riot, sir?
Well, the Metropolitan Police Department, it'd be very difficult to use lethal force in a situation where you have a riot or where there are multiple individuals involved. I mean, unless we were able to isolate, a specific person who is committing an act that creates a life-threatening situation for our officer or for someone else, we would not ordinarily use lethal force in a situation like this.
Okay. Does that change then if it's, well, first off, was the situation on January the 6th declared a riot? And if it was, what time?
Yes, sir. It was declared a riot. And I believe the time was around about 1:50 p.m.
Okay. All right. 1:50 p.m. So do your rules of engagement change then if the situation is declared to be a riot? Is that different from a protest in any way?
Yes, for us it is. In the situation where we declared a riot, members then are donning hard protective gear. Several of the people were dismantling the inauguration stand and using other things to assault many of the officers. I had 65 officers that reported significant injuries as a result of what we were faced with.
Okay, but do the rules of lethal engagement change?
No, the rules of lethal engagement does not change. I mean, in other words, we would not, just randomly start using, lethal force. So we use every less than lethal weapon that we had available to us, pepper spray and other munitions, to try to bring the situation under control.
Thank you very much, Chief. I appreciate your very informative comments. And with that, I see my time has expired and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back, and the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Johnson, is now recognized for 5 minutes.